You know, when we think about what shaped the 20th century, we usually think of big ideas, ideologies, maybe even weapons. But what if one of the most powerful forces was something much more basic? The actual ground beneath our feet. Today we're diving into the global fight for land, a struggle that didn't just cause arguments, it fueled revolutions, toppled governments, and really defined an entire era of massive change.
So let's start with a really fundamental question. When you look back at the biggest, most chaotic upheavals of the last 100 years, we're talking civil wars, coups, the whole shebang, what was the common thread? Yeah, sure, ideology and nationalism were in the mix, but very often the real spark, the thing that got millions of people to risk everything, was something way more tangible.
And there it is. In so many cases, the conflict grew from this deep, gut-level struggle over land and resources. It all boiled down to a few simple questions. Who owns this ground? Who gets to profit from it? And who has to do the backbreaking work on it?
All right, so here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll look at the global land divide that really set the stage for all this conflict. Then, we're going to do a deep dive into China's Communist Revolution, a wild story of promises made and promises broken. After that, we'll see how this same fight played out everywhere from Asia and Africa to Latin America. And then, we'll wrap it all up with the legacies that honestly are still with us today.
Okay, so first, let's just paint the picture of the world at this time. You have to imagine a planet with these deep inequalities. For millions and millions of people, the very land they farmed, the only thing keeping their families alive, was owned by someone else. Maybe a tiny group of elites, maybe a foreign corporation thousands of miles away. This simmering sense of injustice was basically the powder keg for everything that came next.
And wow, nowhere did that powder keg explode quite like it did in China. So let's take a look at how this fight for land fueled one of the biggest, most dramatic revolutions in all of human history. And it all hinged on one incredibly powerful promise.
So how did Mao Zedong actually win after decades of brutal civil war? Well, he tapped into the single biggest desire of China's huge peasant class. He made them a simple, electrifying offer. Fight with us, and when we win, we will take the land from the wealthy landlords and give it directly to you. That one promise, that dream of owning your own farm, was the rocket fuel for his victory in 1949.
But, and this is a massive but, after the revolution was won, that promise of private land ownership was completely shattered. In 1958, Mao launched his Great Leap Forward. It was this radical, almost insane plan to industrialize China practically overnight. And the core of it was the creation of communes, where all that land that had just been given to the peasants was seized right back by the government and merged into these enormous state-run mega-farms.
And this policy wasn't just a failure, it was an absolute catastrophe. The very peasants who had fought for their own land were now essentially forced laborers for the state. If you disagreed, well, you'd be sent to a re-education camp, or worse. And here's the truly mind-bending part. While millions of his own people were starving, Mao was actively exporting grain to the rest of the world to create this illusion of communist success. The human cost, it's just staggering. The Great Leap Forward triggered one of the deadliest famines in history. The estimates are that around 20 million people starved to death in just a couple of years. It's a number that's almost impossible to comprehend, and it was a direct result of this experiment.
And the chaos didn't stop there. Just a few years later, in an effort to regain his grip on power and wipe out any critics, Mao unleashed the Cultural Revolution. It was another horrifying, violent campaign designed to solidify his absolute control over the country.
Okay, but this fight for control wasn't just a story about China. Let's zoom out now, because the struggle wasn't always over farmland. Sometimes it was about other valuable resources, like oil. And what you're about to see is how these local fights quickly got tangled up in the global chess match of the Cold War.
Let's take Iran in 1953. The democratically elected leader, Mohammad Mossadegh. He looks at his country's incredible oil wealth and says, hey, shouldn't this money benefit the people of Iran instead of foreign companies? So he moves to nationalize the oil industry. Well, that set off alarm bells in London and Washington. Fearing they'd lose control of all that oil, the CIA and MI6 basically engineered a coup, kicked out the elected leader, and put the authoritarian, pro-Western Shah back on the throne.
And then, literally the next year, it was like déjà vu in Guatemala. Again, you've got a Democratic leader, Jacob Arbenz, who starts a program of land reform. The problem? His reforms were a direct threat to the massive American-owned United Fruit Company. So the company complained to the US government, which then backed a coup that got rid of Arbez in '54 and put a stop to the reforms, just like that.
So, we've seen what happens when superpowers get involved. But what about in all those newly independent countries in Asia and Africa? You know, after World War II, dozens of nations finally threw off colonial rule. But they were all left with the same burning question. Okay, we're free, so who actually gets to own the land now?
Now, this is really fascinating because it reframes the Vietnam War. It wasn't just a war about communism. For many on the ground, it was a war about land. In the north, the communists used that same playbook from China, promising to redistribute land, and it worked. It won them incredible support from the peasants. Meanwhile, in the south, the US-backed government kept delaying real reform, which made them super unpopular and just added fuel to the fire.
We see a really similar pattern play out in Ethiopia. The Emperor Haile Selassie was an ally of the West, but his attempts at land reform were just too little, too late. They didn't really challenge the power of the old elites. And that failure created this huge well of discontent that eventually led to him being overthrown in 1974 by a socialist military regime, which, you guessed it, quickly aligned itself with the Soviet Union.
But did it always have to end in a violent revolution or a foreign-backed coup? Not at all. And the Indian state of Kerala gives us a totally different model. Through a slow, steady, democratic process that took more than a decade, they passed laws that step-by-step empowered tenant farmers. First, they got the right to buy the land they worked. Then, they got full ownership. And finally, they got labor protections. It was complicated for sure, but it was a path to reform without a revolution. All right, so after that trip around the world, from China to Iran, Guatemala to India, what's the big picture here? Let's try and pull together the main lessons from this global fight for land and resources.
So, at the end of the day, here's what it boils down to. That desire for your own piece of land, for a fair shake, was this universal, explosive force. Communist movements were masters at using that promise to grab power. But, as we saw so tragically in China, state control often led to repression and unimaginable human cost. At the same time, even when newly independent countries tried to enact reforms democratically, they often got crushed if their plans interfered with the interests of the Cold War superpowers.
And that brings us right up to the present, because these fights from the 20th century, they're not just history lessons. Those fundamental questions, who owns the land, who controls the oil, who profits, are still driving conflicts, shaping politics, and fueling our global economy right now. It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? Where are these exact same battles being fought today?